Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Engineering Change with Modern Figures. I'm excited to be here with a dynamic panel of women scientists and engineers to talk about leading the change towards equity and inclusion in engineering education. I approached my colleagues, Drs. Kyla McMullen and Jerry McGruder a few weeks ago when the conversation really started to shift in the wake of George Floyd's murder. I think for the first time in my 25 years of higher education, or experience in higher education, I started to hear conversations that I never heard before, just really open and frank discussions about the experiences of people of color in higher education, and in particular in STEM education and engineering education for us. And so with both of us having, or all three of us having podcast platforms, I thought it would be a good idea to bring together a series of panels to really discuss not what the issues are, because I think well, first of all, we've been seeing those for decades, right? But bring together people like the leaders we have here with us today to start talking about what are the next steps. Over the past few weeks, we've seen institution after institution, organization after organization come out, make very public statements in support of Black Lives Matter, in support of diversity, equity, and inclusion, making various types of pledges. And there are a lot of times institutions and people that you haven't seen do this work before. But accompanying that has been a lot of questions about, but what do I do? I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. How do we strategically address the systemic racism that is just prevalent throughout academia? And so we have a fantastic panel lead with us today to discuss just that, those actionable things that we can do towards change. So we'll get started with some introductions. I want to first introduce myself for those I haven't met. I'm Dr. Yvette E. Pearson. I host the podcast Engineering Change, and I'm also founder and lead consultant of the Pearson Evaluation and Education Research Group, which is the peer group. I do consulting in education research and evaluation focused on equity and inclusion. My podcast, again, is Engineering Change, and I invite you to please subscribe to it. Visit our website, engineeringchangepodcast.com, and you'll see information about our episodes and just the general sense of what we're about. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Kyla.
Thank you, Yvette. I'm Dr. Kyla McMullen, as she mentioned, and I am an assistant professor of computer science at the University of Florida. My primary research deals with computer science in terms of human-centered computing, and more specifically, immersive audio environments. So really cool ways to create 3D sound and immersion and virtual reality and augmented reality so that people can hear things like they're coming from other places and integrating that into systems. But I'm also a Black woman in computer science. So I have this yearning to help and figure out ways that we can make sure that, I can make more people like me. I have a heart for diversity and inclusion. And this is part of what led us to create Modern Figures podcast, which definitely delves into a lot of those issues. And my co-host is Dr. Jeremy Waisome.
Hello and good evening. So I am super excited everyone is here. I am a new lecturer in the engineering education department at the University of Florida. And though I'm a civil engineer by training, I am now working on research around mentoring and broadening participation in engineering and computing. For the last couple of years, I served as a postdoctoral associate in the Department of Computer and Information Science and Engineering, where I did work on a National Science Foundation funded Broadening Participation in Computing Alliance called the Institute for African American Mentoring in Computing Sciences. And through that work, we were able to start a partnership with a sister organization to create Modern Figures podcast. So Yvette, if you can advance the slides. Modern Figures podcast focuses on elevating the voices of Black women in computing to inspire the next generation of the advanced technology workforce. And Kyla and I started this 2 years ago, and it's been an interesting journey. We've sought to really tell the stories of Black women and girls and their experiences in computing and beyond.
Yeah, and our podcast, we're approaching 10,000 listens very soon.
Awesome.
And that was, man, I can't wait. It's been heard in over 40 countries, and we bring on guests. So just about every single episode, we bring a woman who's in the Black women in computing area, and we ask them about, what was their trajectory. We talk about technical areas like their research, social media, robotics, virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and then we also talk about broader issues. So gender diversity, intersectionality, algorithm bias, and then just personal things like, how do you find the time to be an amazing Black woman in this space? So have a listen. It's very conversation style. It's not like a lecture. So, it's a cool listen if I were to say so myself.
You don't have to. I'll say it for you. It is cool.
Yeah, as a non-computer scientist, it works for me. So it's for everyone.
All right. So I want to introduce our first guest. We have Dr. Monica F. Cox. She is founder and CEO of STEMinate LLC, and she's also a professor of engineering education at The Ohio State University. Dr. Cox was a PK sorority, and she was the first African-American woman to be tenured in the College of Engineering at Purdue, in the whole College of Engineering. And I think that's amazing. Another amazing thing, because there's so many amazing things about Dr. Cox, but another amazing thing is that she was the inaugural chair when Ohio State decided to start their engineering education program several years back. She was appointed the inaugural chair. And so she just wrapped up that tenure. And she's also authored 2 fabulous books that I recommend to everybody. Success: Why Being Average is Never an Option, which is a quick read, but it's a lot of power packed in it. Also, Demystifying the Engineering PhD, which really looks at the experiences of people earning PhDs in engineering and what life looks like afterwards, and how those experiences in the program shaped what life looks like afterwards. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Cox.
It's great to be here.
All right. We also have Dr. Marcia Allen Owens, who I want to call Dr. Master because she has all of the degrees. She has her PhD in educational studies with science and environmental education from Emory, a JD, and also a master's in divinity. So she's the first woman to be tenured in the FAMU School of the Environment. She's an ordained elder. She's in the leadership at intersections of environmental science, policy, faith, and equity. Those are lots of cool things put in together. And she's also a board member for the National American Association for Environmental Education. She's also the senior PI on an NSF advanced grant, and it's called Using Cultural Humility to Balance the Institutional and Intersectional Barriers to Equity for STEM Faculty. And it's a really cool deep dive into the climate, culture, and policy and practice that stands in the way of recruiting women advancing through the ranks at FAMU. So some of the topics and issues that they cover are cultural humility, implicit bias, and intersectionality. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Our next panelist is Dr. Claudia Rankins. Claudia is a program director at the National Science Foundation and the Directorate for Education and Human Resources, and she directs the Historically Black Colleges and Universities undergraduate program and the HBCU Experience and Research program. Claudia is co-founder of the Society of STEM Women of Color Incorporated, and she served prior to this role as a faculty member at Hampton University for 22 years. Her educational background is in physics, and she actually, interestingly enough, served as a translator and interpreter for German, French, and English, which is amazing to me.
Absolutely.
My pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Rankins. And finally, we have Dr. Renetta Garrison Tull, who's Vice Chancellor of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of California at Davis. Dr. Tull is a member of the National Academy's Committee on the Science of Effective Mentoring in Science, Technology, Engineering, Medicine, and Mathematics. And probably one of her most notable achievements is being the founding director of AGEP Promise in Maryland. That program has done so much to advance minorities in with PhDs and also in the professoriate. And there are a lot of programs now that are really building what they're doing in their initiatives towards advancing minorities into the professoriate around her work in AGEP Promise. And she was also among the first couple of years of the ABET's Claire L. Felbinger Award for Diversity winners. So she won that award in 2016 and really has too many accolades. We could spend the whole hour going down the list, but we are excited to have Dr. Renetta Garrison Tull with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Pearson. So happy to be here with you.
All right. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll go ahead and
all right. So
dive right in.
Awesome. So the first sort of topic we want to get into with the panelists are a lot of the initiatives that we've been thinking about for education often require faculty, specifically women and faculty of color, to do lots more stuff. So can you speak to this diversity tax, that, as we'll call it, that's put on educators who fit into these marginalized identities, and what leadership can do to make sure they're not overburdening people who are already feeling the burden of what's happening and then being challenged to respond to it? And anyone can go first.
Well, I guess I'll make it brief. The main thing is if women are required to do this kind of work, the extra burden on mentoring and all of the things that we all know about, it has to count for tenure and promotion and be counted towards what we do. And this is, I work at a federal agency, it's sort of the same thing. You know, the few Black women in the building have to be on every committee, have to do all of the service, and then it doesn't count at the end. So if it doesn't begin to be accounted for, I was at an HBCU and I have to say I did get tenure because of my service and teaching, not because of my research. I think that is very rare.
I think it's important for us to also just consider the fact that we could have a very broad audience of people who are in attendance on today's talk. And so we should talk about what tenure is and kind of how that structure has remained mostly unchanged since it was instituted in the US in the 1940s. So for those of you who don't know, most people think of it as you can't get fired now. But there's actually ways that you can absolutely be fired after attaining tenure, which essentially shows your record as an academic. And you have to show that you have a record of published work, that you can obtain grant funding, that you're widely known in your discipline, that you have a strong record of teaching, and that you have a commitment to service. But often that commitment to service is the thing that's weighted least in terms of attaining tenure and promotion. So yeah, I 100% agree with you, Claudia.
Yeah, I want to chime in about the last part of that question though. Like what can leadership do? And I think part of that is to educate themselves. I think so often they rely on people of color to educate them about everything. Like, tell me the references, tell me what to do, how should I be better? And I'm thinking, like, if you are an expert in whatever discipline you are, I know you know how to read, I know you know how to look into a database. Could you please use that energy and identify what you might need to do to also make the environment better? And so I think we need to hold leaders accountable not just people who are diverse, but people who are in the positions to make these decisions, people who are chairs of promotion and tenure committees, people who are deans, presidents, provosts. Like, I want to know what you are going to do, as well. So hold them accountable.
So what do you think is the big, because I do believe strongly that Claudia, definitely you're right. It has to count where it matters to people. And Monica brings up accountability. And so what does that look like? What does holding not just the leadership accountable look like, but the faculty that we are talking about? Okay, this needs to be built into how you're evaluated for promotion and tenure. What does that accountability look like?
Go ahead, Renetta.
No, I was just going to say in some universities, they're starting to build in accountability related to whether it's mentoring or service work or committees, particularly related to broadening participation into some of the steps for tenure, but that hasn't really been the traditional way of doing things. I think I know that Advance has made a really big dent in some of these kinds of things, because a lot of the faculty who were trained as advanced leaders, or who were part of, so Advance being the National Science Foundation's program on advancing women in leadership, large grant program, many millions of dollars that have been invested in a lot of schools and colleges and universities. But there were a variety of interventions and programs that came out of that. And as part of Advance, there were early trainings, and many faculty, particularly faculty in STEM, were asked to go through those trainings. One of the things that I've seen lately at some universities is where people who were at, I will say at maybe the assistant associate and maybe even full faculty ranks, began to then move into other leadership positions as associate dean, provost. They came up, in one sense, they sort of grew up in some of those areas where they were learning more about diversity, broadening participation, such that it wasn't as new and different and strange and scary when situations are brought up and when there are opportunities to make policy changes. It's a slow process though, and so it's not something that is just sort of rapid fire, happening throughout schools and colleges. A lot of times it turns out that we still need a lot of conversation. There still needs to be a very interesting permission, I think, given that you can start to look at issues related to mentoring across gender, across race, and things like that, and that can count toward a level of scholarship, but it's a conversation that continues. We still have a long way to go.
I wanted to get back to a point Monica was making about, so this whole issue now, everybody feels they need to speak about race. People who before, like on my job, told me I couldn't speak about race, now are speaking about race. But then this extra burden now on Black colleagues to be the ones who have to educate all white people about issues of race, I think that needs to stop. Monica, you said it, do your own reading. We can't add an extra burden now on our Black colleagues to educate us on what racism is and what we need to do and what we should do better. Those of us in charge need to figure that one out.
Yeah, and Marcia, I know you're also someone who has a background in being at an HBCU, and you mentioned before we went live that you are the only woman.
Yeah, I am PI of one of the grants that Renetta talked about. I am the principal investigator for FAMU Advance, and we are at the end of year 2, and year 2 has been disrupted by the pandemic. So we're shifting some things that we're trying to do. And so being at an HBCU, especially in today's climate, there are a lot of assumptions about what we don't have to talk about. We need to talk about race at historically Black colleges and universities as well, especially in the STEM fields. More than 60% of our students in STEM are Black women, but of the faculty members in STEM departments are Black women. And so that diversity tax is very impactful there. If I'm not on a committee, then there are no women on a committee in my school. And I can't be on all the committees, but when my voice is there, it makes a difference. When my voice is absent, it makes a difference. And so the balance of trying to make sure that I attain my career goals, but also being that voice for diversity and equity, it does bring a lot of pressure. But the presumption is, oh, you're Black and you're at an HBCU, everything is good. You don't have to deal with any of the isms. But science, by its nature, is not made for women and not made for Black women or women of color. And so the scientists who are at HBCUs look very much like the scientists who are at PWIs. And so they have the same implicit and explicit biases as the scientists everywhere. And so we deal with things like, you don't look like a scientist. Why are you here? Oh, your mother must be proud of you. All kinds of microaggressions, because when folks see the few women that we have, they're assumed to be somebody else. They're not assumed to be a professor. So, you know, when I was younger, I would come and sit in the classroom way ahead of time and sit in one of the student seats, and the class would fill up and they're waiting for the professor and I stand up. And, you know, being at FAMU, the number of students who have told me that I'm the first Black woman to ever teach them science through their whole K through 12 career. They went through elementary and high school never having a science teacher. So that speaks to the low numbers of women who are gifted and talented and educated in science who choose to go into higher ed.
Marcia, I just want to say that is so important. Like, I want to be valued for the work that I do that is my academic research. Yes, I value my Blackness. Yes, I value my womanhood. And I think those things are wonderful attributes of who I am. But at my job, you hired me to do my job. And I think, yes, I'm capable of educating my colleagues about racism in the United States. Yes, I can tell you about history and what it's like to be African American here in this country. But is that the work that I want to be known for? Is that what my scholarship is about? It's not. There are people whose actual discipline of study is critical race theory, who have scholarship around anti-racism. And those are the people that I think we should really be pointing people to address some of these things.
Yeah, and Marcia, I was just nodding my head with you because I taught at an HBCU for 12 years. I was the only woman in my department. I was the only American-born faculty member in my department. And in fact, our three engineering departments, each department at one point had one woman in it. So, and two of us are very close. We're very close to this day. We actually went to undergrad together at that same HBCU. But my experience was very similar. It's every committee, especially if it was something that had to be hands-on with the students. It's the advising overload, which I love that part of my job. I love advising and I love just pouring into the students, but I cannot be the only one in the whole department. And so it is definitely, I guess, a misconception that people have that that things are so drastically different for faculty at HBCUs. In fact, I had a challenge when I went up for my promotion to associate professor, that I had to battle that all the way to our vice chancellor's office, because I was basically they tried to change the metrics for me. They tried to change the metrics so that I wouldn't get it, and I had to fight that, and then I earned it, and then I left. And so it was just it's unreal sometimes, some of the things that you do encounter, and it's unfortunate. And again, it's not every department. I know colleagues in other departments that had great experiences, but by and large, like you said, that the makeup of faculty in STEM departments at HBCUs is not so very different from other places in a lot of cases.
So and then the thing about having the advanced grant, I'm sorry, Monica. The thing about having the advanced grant, and it's a big deal. It's $3 million, National Science Foundation, $3 million, the commitment to undergo institutional transformation. And so in that first month, I was really excited. And then a man came and said, "Oh, you got the girl grant."
Wow.
And so I'm like, I brought $3 million to the university, but it's on the wrong thing. And so that was a wake-up call for me in terms of how the work that I've chosen to undertake is going to be like steering a cruise liner. The turn is going to be very, very slow, but oh yeah, that's the girl grant. And so we have a lot of education to do.
Do you ever feel like, because you speak out about social justice and equity and girl issues, that you're being pigeonholed almost? And I work in a building with mostly 1,000 mostly white men, and I'm not known for being a scientist like they are. I'm known for being, here she comes again, talking stuff, broadening participation. Does that ever get to you, Monica? Does that ever get to you? Do you experience that and others?
A little bit. I'll say this, like, I feel that mine kind of goes into a negative space, actually, because I am so vocal. And I think when I am the person who's not just the one who'll speak about it, but I'll also call it out among people. And I think that it is, she's the one who says it, but she's the one who's going to cause trouble. And I think that there's something that's also connected to the fact that when you speak about equity, and when you speak about what you do expect as a woman or as a woman of color, people are kind of they take it personally. And I think there's there's a lot of education that needs to happen in between. Like, how do you have a conversation with someone to define who you are? But when I speak to you, I'm speaking to you, in a certain way, or I'm using certain language. So yes, Claudia, absolutely.
I just wanted to bring up another kind of area that relates to this, is the idea of you're the good Black. It's tokenism, where it's like, oh, you fit this idea of what an educated Black person should be. And so I can put you in a space and accept you for that. But as soon as you decide to have a conversation about something that is controversial, maybe, or real and honest and truth, that idea disappears suddenly. So how do you deal with the tokenism that comes with being a woman in the STEM fields, and in particular in engineering, for those of you who are in engineering? How do you move in spaces where, that's how you're seen often?
So I want to just say, something that someone told me a long time ago is like, you do your work and you do your work well also. And so if someone tries to put you into that box, you remind people about your work also. When you're looking at the publications, you're looking at the books, you're looking at the data. One thing I always say as an engineer, as someone in STEM, is state the facts and remain professional. And so often people want to see kind of that emotion and, oh my goodness, the angry Black woman or whatever. But it's like, look, the facts are X, Y, and Z. And this is what happened on this date. And these are the papers. And this is what the studies show. And when you present that, at that point, I think that it adds a level of credibility to the work that you do. You just have to remember to not get off your game because someone's trying to downplay what you do. I think you always present that. And I want to go back really quickly, and it's kind of connected, but it's about stories. And when we talked about the taxes and how people show the work that they're doing, I think in working with my junior faculty, you have that narrative for your promotion and tenure document. And if you are a person of color and you're bringing all the students of color into the department, I'm going to tell you, put that in your narrative, because when you went from 0 to 5 students all working in your laboratory, that's a story. And when you look at student evaluations, of course, we have all the negative ones and all the data that shows about women and people of color and what happens in STEM. But when you have that student who says, I've never had a woman of color, and you completely transformed how I see the field, and I want to get a PhD, that goes in your document also. And so that's where I'm coming back to, us really thinking about the stories and writing them down and making them visible so people know that this is what we're doing, not just for ourselves, but for the department, for the college, and for the university. And so that's a workshop within itself, how to tell your story so that, service is not downplayed, but you're showing that your presence has made a difference in that university.
That's really helpful and powerful. My latest publication is a chapter in the book Presumed Incompetent 2. The first volume was a pretty big seller for an academic book, and a second volume just came out in April. And the title of my chapter is Closet Chair and Committee Side Piece. And people look and they go, what? Closet chair means that, students come to me. Oftentimes their advisors don't know that they come to me. And I'm helping them through process issues, but I'm not on their committee. But there's the behind the scenes that I have to do. And so I've now gotten to the point where I say, I'm retired from being closet chair. I'm trying to make full professor. If I'm not in your top 5, because there are 5 people on your committee. If I'm not in your top 5, there's only so much that I can do for you. And so that story was very difficult to write. And when I wrote the chapter, and at the end of the chapter, I asked, why didn't you delete this? Because the story has to be told, because it is happening. And with the grant that we have, one of the things that we've done is brought the single people together into a room. And my graduate students said, you all have the same stories, but you all didn't know it, because you had never talked to each other. And so telling our stories is very, very important, even when it's painful, even when it bothers you. Because I had to ask, well, why do you stay? You just wrote all of this and it's true, and you have documentation on everything that you said. This is tough. But I have produced Black women PhDs, and that's my goal. And so one of the things that I'm learning to come to grips with is that focusing on Black women doesn't mean that I'm excluding anybody else. I just need to focus in right here because somebody needs to focus in because the numbers need to get higher, and we need to understand why the PhDs that we do produce are choosing not to go into the academy. So the storytelling aspect is cathartic, but it also makes it real for people who have no idea or want to have no idea that things are going on.
Marsha, I really like that point of where you mentioned that, you know, people feel as though inclusion, you including Black women, basically means you're excluding everyone else. And I wanted to ask Renetta, it's so weird to call you that because I knew you was Dr. Tull undergrad, but I wanted to ask you, you know, because you just moved to the UC system, like how do you communicate to faculty who just like don't get it, that this diversity and inclusion doesn't mean I'm taking away something from you, but we're just bringing more people to a table that can hold everyone, you know, no one's taking your chair.
Yeah, it's a process. So I think the interesting thing is being on an administrative side, I never thought that I would be in this position, and years ago had never aspired to be. I thought I was just going to run my lab and, you know, have great research and that kind of thing. And, you know, things changed and here I am now. One of the things that I have been trying to do is build institutional capital. And I spent the first several months at my university, my new university in particular, trying to meet with deans and meet with unit heads and so forth, and sort of find out where they were related to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What have you done so far? What are you trying to do? Positioning my office as a partner to help them to reach their goals and so forth. I think that was very helpful. We talk about meetings and burden and tax, and there are some things that are taxing, especially now on this side, when you're both a member of an underrepresented group and now you're in an administrative position too. It's very strange. And it's one of those things that I'm still trying to balance. But I have tried, and I actually got this from the former president of UMBC. I used to work with, who you know very well, Dr. Freeman Rabowski, who used to say, you know, let's not be afraid to talk about race, and let's not be scared of it. Let us start to talk about race in a way that is that has depth, that's important, and that's not something that you're always going to find to be awkward. And so that's the approach that I'm actually taking now. In the newsletter, we have a newsletter that we do from our DEI office, our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion office, that comes out every 2 weeks. And there was an entry that I wrote in the issue yesterday that was based on a design thinking session that our Graduate School of Management did when they had a really great session with breakout rooms on Zoom and whiteboarding and asking about anti-racism and those kinds of things. And there was a person in that room, I think it was Daria Costello, who said, you know what, this is uncomfortable, and it's an uncomfortable reckoning. And so sitting in the discomfort of the uncomfortable reckoning is something that I've been talking about recently. And that's the approach that I'm going forward with in my leadership role with the university, that we have to sit with the discomfort. It is uncomfortable, but it's okay. We have to start to look at our histories, and we have two fantastic professors who are part of our Transformative Justice and Education Center, Dr. Maisha Wynn and Dr. Tori Wynn, who were previously at Wisconsin before they came to Davis. And they talk about these pedagogical stances of looking at histories, but also looking at race, justice, and language, and then looking at future and trying to figure out how all of those things work together. And so we're looking at those things, and I'm hoping that as we start to explore and talk and not be afraid of stepping into this work, and that people can work together and our leaders can work together, the chairs, the vice chancellors, the vice provosts, as well as the faculty, that we'll be able to move forward.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to follow up too. So Renetta, you have a very supportive environment, and I think everyone does not. And so I'm just thinking, what do people do when they don't have that? Like when everybody doesn't get it, I feel like that's still something that a lot of people are asking. So I'm throwing it back to everybody a little bit, because I love your environment, and I think others should model that, but the reality is it's not that way.
And it's not that everybody gets it. I just want to say that there are still people who are still in a learning process. And so, we're still working on that broadly, but I just wanted to put that little disclaimer in.
Yeah, and Monica, that was actually a good segue to my next question, because and we just got a 15-minute warning, so this might be it if we go all the way around with it. But I find, and when I said at the outset, everybody's asking, what to do, what the action should look like and all that. And the people who really get it, they're kind of ahead of the curve and have the leadership like Renetta and other places have in place. But what I find also in my conversations with people, in the haste to jump to actions, sometimes they're not doing things that are well informed. And so sometimes these actionable strategies that people are wanting to go out and step out into can actually be counter to what is going to be effective in promoting and delivering positive change. For instance, there are, and historically, there have been these notions of diversity hires. And so which says basically, well, a minority is not going to compete for this position. So we're going to have this set aside, and everybody's going to flag that person as the diversity hire. And so we get back to that dynamic where what that person brings to the table isn't valued equally with what their colleagues bring to the table. And we see it with programs for students and all of that, where we separate all of these special groups aside and really perpetuate the marginalization that occurs. And so I wanted to just, and like I said, I don't know if this is going to be our last round, but what do we do to, or if you have some examples to share in terms of those actionable strategies that we were talking about that are positive and are not going to be detrimental to what we're trying to accomplish in terms of equity?
So just briefly going back to advanced training, I just can't, I guess, say enough about how transformative that program has been, because there are trainings that are connected to that depending on your program, but many of the programs do have trainings that if they're taken seriously and done well, then you can have campus leaders who at least have a level of knowledge that they can bring to the table, so that when there are people who are not from an underrepresented group, or are not a person of color, or don't have a lived experience, at least they can try to move in the right direction based on the training and the information that they've received. I know University of Michigan started the STRIDE program as an example, and that has been replicated throughout, where you have some of the top PIs or principal investigators who are the winners of these very, very large multi-million-dollar grants on campus, who are taking the time to do, as Dr. Cox talked about, learning and reading and sort of doing deep dives into the literature and becoming people who are not quite ambassadors, but sometimes peer educators to others, and particularly to their white counterparts, so that they don't have to put the burden on their faculty of color. So it tries to at least alleviate what we have often called that minority tax. Every school does not have an advanced program. Some schools have tried to replicate it, and it is hard when, as Dr. Owens mentioned, you're dealing with long years, decades of systemic kinds of issues related to racism and sexism and classism and all kinds of things. And when we think about an institution, one of the things I think that really hit me the first time I went to London and saw these, the old universities, like, you know what, these were really not meant for us back in the day. When they were set up, the whole system, the whole academic system was never really meant for, for women, especially not for Black women. And so there are all kinds of things that are embedded into the structure that we're now saying, yes, but we're here and we're scholars and we're trying to A, do our work, but B, also make it better for those who are coming after us, because there's so much innovation and opportunity and just things that are out there that we can do to help to make this world a better place. And it has to be part of it. We have a colleague who is at NIH now working on a vaccine, who was, part of one of these programs. She was in the Meyerhoff program years ago. And so we have to make room. And so I think universities have to, when we talk about uncomfortable reckonings, like you have to make room, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because there's really valuable science that needs to come to the forefront, because we need it so that it can move our world forward. And in some cases, literally save lives.
I'd like to expand a little bit on what you said, Renetta. I was listening to Hannah Nicole Jones on NPR, and she was talking about reparations and what forms reparations might take. And so when I'm thinking about the inequities in the education system, the inequities in funding, the research intensive universities versus those that are not research intensive, that are often minority serving institutions. And when I think about where the majority of Black and Brown and Indigenous students get their education, it is at those largely underfunded universities that would never ever get an advance grant, by the way. So I think we also have to consider that sort of more on a larger scale. How do we make sure that there is equity in funding to all institutions so that all students have access to the same kind of good education? I thought about that as you mentioned, these venerable institutions in England. There are institutions here that are also not made for some people, which then, I'm thinking of, when I think of the difference in education at Mississippi Valley State University and Ole Miss, for example, that's also something we have to address. I'm sort of speaking now on behalf of like funding agencies and others to make sure we address that issue as well. And yes, I said the R word, reparations.
And I agree with that, Claudia. I with Claudia at NSF for 3 years. And I remember going to conferences and literally having faculty members come up to the NSF booth if I was staffing the booth. And they said, well, NSF doesn't fund institutions like mine. And so that is definitely something, the hurdle that needs to be overcome.
So as we're coming to a close, first of all, I'm so thrilled that all of you were available. And the reason I'm saying this is, for those of you who are listening, these women are truly leaders and change agents in the STEM fields. And they've been doing amazing work for decades. And so one of the things that I want to point out is that I'm just getting started, right? And I am incredibly passionate about engineering and seeing my discipline change for the better. And I personally have made the decision that I want to pursue leadership someday, but I know that's not always the case. And so I wanted to know if you intended on following the path that you followed, and if not, what led you to where you are right now?
Okay, can I chime in for 2 seconds? And then I know that there's so much richness in this question from all the other panelists. Literally, people have spoken life into me. And so it just goes to show how important mentoring is and how important it is to speak to other people and let them, you're going to be a great leader, Jeremy. We've known that for years, right? And so it's just a wonderful opportunity to just watch it happening even now. But when people see certain things. And for me, they've spoken and said, you're going to be, or you should be, or you should consider this. Those kinds of things are incredibly important. But I think it's also very important to take advantage of opportunities when they come to you, because, for example, I met Dr. Cox at a panel that Dr. Rankins had years ago. And so we actually met at NSF on a review panel many, many years ago. And so taking those kinds of opportunities, and then also telling people that you're interested in it. So now knowing that you are interested in leadership, if there are opportunities to nominate you for a panel or to provide some other kinds of information, right? We want the communities to be able to do that. And so I never thought that I would. I'm happy that I'm here and hoping that I can continue to serve. And I thank everybody for their support.
Jeremy, I'd like to say you're already a leader. Oftentimes we confuse having the title with being a leader. And you're already leading by creating this podcast, speaking out. I remember being untenured and someone told me, you're going to have to be quiet for 6 years. And I said, well, I will implode if I have to sit and be quiet. So let me see what the requirements say so I can do the work, meet and exceed the requirements, because I'm not going to be quiet. And so you're already a leader. And honestly, there are people who have titles who are not leaders. And so please don't confuse those two. Just continue on the trajectory that you're on. And if the title is something that you desire, take those leadership skills and add it to those titles, but you're already a leader.
I'm actually incredibly impressed and heartened by so many young Black women, and I meet them on social media. So many young Black women STEM faculty who are so not only outspoken, but really delve into the issues and teach us older folk, what's important. So I just want to thank you for that.
And I want to chime in a little bit too, because Jeremy, I just met you last year. You're really amazing. And I could say that I know that I always wanted to be a leader. Like when I was 19, I said I wanted to be a university president. So my Spelman College president, Dr. Renetta B. Cole, influenced me. And I said, I want to be Dr. Renetta B. Cole, like my Spelman sisters. But what I realized over time is that it is difficult being I would say a Black woman in traditional leadership roles in STEM and engineering, and to be an authentic person is also really difficult. And I got to a point maybe a couple of years ago where I said, being a university president is too small for me. And people are like, what does that mean? Like, that's so pompous. And I said, you know what? I see that there are people across institutions who need to connect. And when you're the only person, like, just look at the structure, study higher education, board of trustees, who runs a university? A university is very political. And I think a lot of the work, if you're a change agent and if you really care about social justice, is kind of outside the walls of the ivory tower. And it takes time to see yourself as a leader in a system that may not even exist yet. And I think that for women of color, I think there are a lot of women who are going to define themselves very differently than what we see as leadership in higher education. And those women have to be very comfortable speaking in ways that people may not want them to speak, but it's necessary for the time that we're in. And so the fact that you all are doing this podcast is a form of leadership and speaking and educating and teaching and doing things that we don't see. And so this leadership is just as important as being a dean, a provost, a president, a department chair, because this is where people are. They are seeing you and listening to this in ways that they never will on your campuses. So let's change how we think about leadership and don't beat ourselves down if we don't fit that mold. So keep doing what you do.
You.
Y'all are preaching. I'm telling you. our time, I cannot believe our time is up. We definitely, like Jeremy said, we want to thank all of you for taking time out to be with us today. Thank everybody who's joined us online. And I don't know what you guys think. I mean, I know some of you have other commitments and have to go. And I'm thinking maybe Jeremy, Kyla, and I can just kind of wrap up a little bit and then just kind of move on. But we, again, want to thank you for joining Engineering Change with Modern Figures. The Leading the Change episode will be again live next Wednesday, July 1st, for an episode on allyship in action. And so stay tuned. You'll see your social media threads flooded with announcements for that. And also want to give a plug because on this coming Wednesday, July 1st, also, Dr. Cox and I recorded an interview on engineering change a couple of months ago now. Things have been moving in slow motion, but that episode is going to go live. So thank you again, Dr. Cox, for joining us. And again, we want to invite you to subscribe to our different podcasts. And I didn't really say earlier, but Engineering Change is a podcast focused on just that, how we can redefine engineering education as we know it. So re-image who we see as engineers and what we see as engineering, de-silo academic programs and problem solving, and fine-tune our climate and culture so that it's inclusive and set up so everybody can thrive. So redefine engineering education is what we're about. So I'll toss to Jeremy and Kyla.
Yeah, so again, thank you all for being here. We just wanted to give you a little bit more information about Modern Figures Podcast. So you can find us online at modernfigurespodcast.com. We're on all of the social medias. And so if you are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you can find us there. We're also on YouTube. And yeah, we will be gearing up for our third season here coming soon. And we have a few goals this time around. We are hoping to, first of all, create enough episodes to last an entire year. So I'm terrified and excited. I don't know how Kyla feels, but probably the same. We are going to be partnering with a new organization this time around. So we got sponsorship from the Computing Research Association Widening Participation Group. So thanks to them, we'll be able to get the additional episodes done, and we'll have some fancy new equipment to record on that will look similar to this. And we are hoping to conduct research on our podcast episodes. So we really feel like it's important to get these stories out there, to kind of do some analysis of what we've heard some of the women share about their experiences as Black women in computing. And we are just honored to have you hopefully join us and hear about the incredible people who are contributing to all different aspects of computing.
Yeah. And on behalf of both podcasts, I wanted to shout out also the people who are taking time on their Friday evening to watch. We have Carlotta Johnson-Berry, who said, "We don't need any more statements. We need some doggone action. All boots on the ground." Yes, Carlotta, definitely. And people have also made the points that PWIs get a majority of the funding. This is from Lauren Thomas. Hey, Lauren. PWIs get a majority of funding for diversity and inclusion in STEM, but their outcomes are nil for the past 30 years. So that's something to ponder. But lots of people have been giving us really good feedback. We have Jennifer, Alicia, Lauren, Jesse, lots of fun people. Erica, everybody's very excited about this. So thank you all so much for tuning in. This is only the first, so you know what you have to look forward to.
And can I shout out, we have Dr. Stephanie Adams joining us. And she just wrapped up her term as ASEE President, American Society for Engineering Education. And I will give you a teaser, stay tuned, because she will be joining us on one of these live episodes. And I also see a number of my former students on here. I'm going to give a shout out to Denzel Caldwell in Austin, because he not only commented on Facebook, but he also texted me He said, y'all talking good. So thank you, everybody. And I see my families listening and watching and everything. So thank you, everybody, for your support. And again, we want to thank our guests for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
And thank Quincy behind the scenes, keeping us together back here. He doesn't say much, but he keeps it together.
Thanks, Quincy.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Fun. Bye.